Today on the Locked On Blues podcast, got a really exciting episode for you guys. Yet another crossover episode, this time with Jack from Locked On Blackhawks. This was a really fun episode. I had a good time recording it. Talked about the upcoming season for the Blackhawks, the upcoming season for the Blues, the future down the line for both the teams. Plus, we both got into some of our favorite moments from the iconic Blues Blackhawks rivalry. It was a really fun episode. Just a quick note. We did record it on Zoom. That's why you're not going to be seeing any of the overlays and stuff. It's going to look a little bit different from the typical videos. If you're watching on YouTube, audio and stuff, it should still be the same. Anyways, without further ado, I'll let you guys enjoy the episode. Make sure you check out Locked On Blackhawks and check out Locked On Blues on YouTube. If you're not, hit that subscribe button. Almost at 500. See you guys soon in the episode.
You're Locked On Blues, your daily podcast on the St. Louis Blues. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to a special crossover edition of Locked On Blackhawks and Locked On Blues. Just quickly wanted to thank everyone for making the show your first listen here to start off your day. And also wanted to remind everyone that you can listen to Locked On Blues or Locked On Blackhawks for free wherever you get your podcasts. You can also watch the video version of each episode free of charge on YouTube as well. I'm your host, Jack Bushman, joined today by Josh Hyman from Locked On Blues, as we have yet another Central Division crossover ahead of the 2022-2023 regular season. Josh, thank you so much for taking the time to join me today, man. Really appreciate it. How you doing this afternoon, and how you feeling as we start to close in on the regular season here, brother?
Oh, I'm doing well. I'm so excited for hockey to start. As much as I love baseball, you know, it's always tough when baseball is the only sport going. It's not as exciting. Football's been good, but hockey's my true love. I'm so excited to get the season going. It's going to be an exciting one.
Yeah, I'm really stoked. And hey, this month of October is going to be extra exciting for you, as the Cardinals look like they're going to be making a run potentially in the playoffs, while my Chicago Cubs have been eliminated since basically the day the season started. So October should make for a pretty fun month for you, but yeah, man.
Pujols chasing 700 too. It's great stuff.
It's got me watching Cardinals games, and I'm like looking in the mirror, wondering who I am. But I want to see Albert Pujols get that record. In all honesty, I mean, how cool would that be for him to hit 700 and back with the Cardinals? Of course, like, it's just such a storybook ending that even a Cubs fan is watching from afar. But as you mentioned, I'm definitely super stoked for hockey season as well. Hockey's my baby. And man, we're just a couple of weeks away here. Preseason games. There's actually a game between the Blackhawks and the Blues not too far away. So
yes,
yeah, man, the grind is about to start here. But Josh, between our two teams, it's probably going to be a tale of two very different seasons, with the Blackhawks looking at the bigger picture ahead and embarking on a real rebuild this time, while the St. Louis Blues, of course, are gearing up for another run towards the Stanley Cup playoffs. For segment one here, we can start by talking about the St. Louis Blues and an outlook on this upcoming season. And then for segment two, can flip it over to you, and we'll wrap things up with a little fun segment three. But the first question I have for you today, Josh, is what do you make of the St. Louis Blues offseason? Because from afar, at least, looks like they didn't make a whole lot of major moves. You know, they traded Ville Husso, lose David Perron. They added a couple of depth pieces. They added Tomas Greiss. Overall, are you happy with this offseason? Are you upset that maybe more didn't happen? How do you kind of break it all down?
Yeah, I'd say overall I'm happy with the offseason. I think the Blues are relying a lot on in-house growth from guys, especially like Robert Thomas and Jordan Kyrou, giving out those big extensions, which I'm thrilled about. Kind of a transitional year for the Blues in the sense that they're going to be right up against the cap next season, and they don't have a ton of players signed. So I think the team's going to look very different next season than it does this season. But that doesn't mean that this season is sort of like they're punting it away. I think they have a very competitive roster. I think they did a really good job of shoring up that bottom six, which was something that was a little bit of a carousel last year. They didn't have a true identity on that fourth line, sometimes the third line as well. And that's one of the needs that they addressed with smaller moves, bringing in guys like Josh Levo, Noel Chari, Martin Ferk, so it's going to be a competitive bottom six, which I'm excited about. They re-signed Nick Leddy for a couple years, which it is what it is. He's a solid defenseman. He's nothing special, but he fills out the top four. But what I'm most excited about is to see the growth from the guys that we already know, what they're capable of. Jordan Kyrou, Robert Thomas, Ivan Barbashev had a huge 20-plus goal season last year. I'm looking forward to seeing if he can build on that. It's going to be a fun year, similar roster to last season, minus David Perron and minus Philly Husso. But, the Blues were 2 wins away from taking down the Colorado Avalanche. And if Binnington stayed healthy, I've maintained that they could have done it if the chips fell in the right direction. So I'm looking forward to seeing them build off of that, come into the season with a bit of a chip on their shoulder and contend for the top spot in the Central.
Yeah, the Blues gave the Colorado Avalanche as good of a run as anybody did. I mean, they were, seconds away from forcing overtime in that game 6, and who knows how the rest of the series goes. But one thing you did reference is that this team could potentially look different come this time next year. And one thing I noticed when I was looking at the Blues cap friendly is not only will Vladimir Tarasenko, this is the final year of his contract, but it's also the final year of Captain Ryan O'Reilly's current deal. And I wanted to ask you about that a little bit. Like, do you expect Factor to be back in St. Louis next year? They have a lot of money given out long-term, like especially with Robert Thomas and Jordan Kyrou's deals kicking in next year. Is there going to be enough room for Ryan O'Reilly? What's kind of your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's funny. I think I've talked about this on every single crossover I've done. I'm going to try to phrase it a little differently so my listeners don't hear me say the exact same things, but it's definitely a thought that's come through my mind. And the way that I look at it, I'm going to lay it out objectively. Ryan O'Reilly is getting up there in age a little bit. He has shown a little bit of regression, but he is still a tremendous player. He's making $7.5 million. I would expect he'd want around the same, if not maybe a little bit of a pay cut. But the big thing to me, and the thing that I have to keep reminding myself and sort of trying to mentally prepare, is the last 2 Blues captains, Blues fans have convinced themselves that they're coming back. David Backes and Alex Pietrangelo, no way they'd let them walk. No way they would leave. They just got named captain, similar to Ryan O'Reilly. And then offseason comes around, both of them leave. I'm not saying I think it's going to happen, but I think it's more likely than a lot of people think, in the sense that, there's no way. O'Reilly came in and won a Stanley Cup, Selke, Conn Smythe, all that stuff. He racked up the hardware in that cup run year. And he is probably maybe the best thing to happen to the Blues in the modern era, in the sense that I think he really propelled them to win a cup. I mean, he tied a record set by Wayne Gretzky, scoring in 5 consecutive Stanley Cup final games. Like, the Blues do not win that cup without him. Tremendous move. Best trade in my Blues fandom history by far. But they have 13 players signed for this next season, and they're already close to $70 million with those 13 players. So that is at minimum 9 more players they need to bring in, with $20 million of cap space. And if you're given close to half of that cap space to Ryan O'Reilly, you're making it really difficult. Do I want it to happen? More than anything, I want Ryan O'Reilly to retire a member of the St. Louis Blues. But just looking at the roster, looking at cap friendly, unless some other dominoes fall, I'm not sure how realistic it is. Then again, Doug Armstrong's a wizard. We could see some trades happen. O'Reilly come back in for a little bit less money. I think it's possible, but I think there's a realistic scenario where the Blues have a new captain next season.
Man, that's crazy to hear, especially because, O'Reilly did, have, I think, some offensive struggles in the regular season last year. His game is built for the Stanley Cup playoffs, and that came alive
100%.
This year as well when the Blues were alive. Like, he looked back 100%. Like the Ryan O'Reilly from when they won the Stanley Cup, making an impact each and every game on both ends of the ice. So that's definitely going to be an interesting scenario to watch from afar, as another St. Louis Blues captain is dealing with the contract situation. The last question I wanted to ask you today, Josh, is one that I've been asking Blues fans for quite a while. I went to college at Mizzou, so I've dealt with Blues fans for a long time, and it's true now as it was in 2015 before the Blues won the cup. I always told Blues fans, listen, this team's good. I believe in this team. They have a lot of pieces, I think, but you're not going to get anywhere without a goaltender. And then Jordan Binnington comes alive in the playoffs. Obviously, he gets that deal. And, he's had flashes recently in the past couple of seasons, but I feel like he hasn't been able to consistently put it together, at least at the level we saw when the Blues hoisted the Stanley Cup. How do you feel about the netminder position moving forward? Because as we've already referenced, you trade Ville Husso, who looked really good at times last year, and now it's the Jordan Binnington show once again. And he still has 5 years left on that current deal. Do you feel confident in Binnington? Are you worried? What's the overall feeling about the St. Louis Blues goaltender position heading into this year?
I'm confident in the sense that I think this is a big make or break year for him. Ville Husso gets traded, like you mentioned, and they bring in Thomas Greiss, who, he's nothing special. No offense to him if he's listening, which he's got better things to do. But this is the first time that Jordan Binnington's really had a true backup. He was lucky enough to have Ville Husso step up and basically be the starter down the stretch. And the Blues don't make the playoffs without Ville Husso as their de facto starter last season. And Jordan Binnington had that safety net, and he doesn't have that anymore. If he struggles again and they need to turn to Thomas Greiss for more than like 30 games, 35, 40 games, they're not going to make the playoffs. In my honest opinion, I don't think that Thomas Greiss is a goalie that is capable of, winning enough games like that because he's brought in as a backup. But the other thing that I think a lot of people didn't notice is how good Jordan Binnington was in that Colorado series before he got injured. I had not seen Jordan Binnington play that good of hockey since the Stanley Cup Finals or just that entire playoff run in general. He finally looked like he had gotten back to that level. Heading into his first playoff start, I think he was like 0-9 in his previous playoff games heading into that and had struggled in the regular season. And it really felt like if he struggled in those playoffs, like who knows what was going to happen. His name was in trade rumors and he came in, all the pressure in the world, best team in the NHL. And he really made it look like he could have stolen that series. I maintain that they were getting outplayed in every single game, even the games that they won. But the reason why they won those games is Jordan Binnington. And there are a few goalies on the planet that can steal you games against any team in the playoffs, much less the Colorado Avalanche, who have a Harlem Globetrotters level offense. So not only did he play that well, he gets injured from Nazem Kadri, who he hates because who doesn't? And he's got a chip on his shoulder. He relies on his confidence. He relies on, he likes getting booed by the opposing fans. He really thrives in that sort of scenario. And he's coming into next season. He's angry. He got hurt. He knows he probably thinks he would have won the Stanley Cup if he stayed healthy because that's the type of guy that he is. And I think he's going to come into this next season with a fire lit under him more so than he ever has. I don't want to say he coasted after the Cup run, but the pressure was never the same after that. He won the Cup, pressure's off from that sense. But next year, I think he knows true backup behind him. He's got to be the guy, and he's going to take that. He's going to ride with it. I have him as a maybe a sneaky Vezina candidate for this year. I've said that once or twice. I think if he can play the level of hockey that he played in that Colorado series for a full regular season, which that's a big if, he could be a Vezina candidate.
Yeah, we know what type of game he can play when he's the most confident. I agree. It's definitely a make or break season for Jordan Binnington. And I also feel like if he's really good, the St. Louis Blues are going to be a wagon again and could be the team that could upset the Colorado Avalanche out in the Western Conference. We'll have to see. But Josh, thank you so much for all that insight on the St. Louis Blues before the regular season begins here in just a couple of weeks. Coming up in just a minute, folks, we'll flip it over to Josh for some Blackhawks questions. But first, I got to talk to you all about Bet Online. BetOnline.net is your number one source for all pro and college football betting needs and sports info this season. You can find all of the latest football developments, game matchups, news, and podcasts on whatever game you want to place a wager on. BetOnline is also your continued source for all sports wagering information, including live betting, esports, and game scores. It's both the fastest and the easiest way to check in on all your favorite sports and events, including MLB, MMA, boxing, and even golf. So head on over to the website today, or you can also use your mobile device to learn more about all the trends in action. Bet Online, where the game starts. All right, for segment 2, we're going to flip it on over to Josh and see what kind of Blackhawks questions he has for our crossover episode today. Josh, what do you got for me, brother?
All right, elephant in the room. Blatant tank. Like, the Blackhawks have been the team, since I started getting into hockey, like the last 10 years. It's Blackhawks this, Blackhawks that, Patrick Kane, Jonathan Taves, and then all of a sudden they got this loyal fan base, bandwagon and diehards. If I was a Blackhawks fan, I'd feel a little disrespected that they're just completely punting the season. Like, you could say, oh, they're letting the young guys play, but you hear Patrick Kane and Jonathan Taves comments like, we don't agree with the direction of this season. We don't agree with the direction of this franchise. And to me, you got two guys that gave you a 10-year stretch of hockey that any hockey fan could dream of. And this is how the front office repays them, by making them play with a bunch of, rookies and AHLers in what might be one of their last seasons as a member of the Chicago Blackhawks. Are you a little pissed off?
For sure. I'm definitely upset. And, especially with Jonathan Taves and Patrick Kane, not only is this likely going to be their last year with the Blackhawks, and that still really hasn't even set into me. I mean, that was my childhood. That's what got me into the game of the hockey. It's what got me to fall in love with this team. And yeah, it's frustrating really that we've reached this point. But the one thing I will say is that the new regime, I don't think they had a choice, because Stan Bowman, the previous GM, let's rewind 2 years, Josh. The Chicago Blackhawks sent out a letter to their fan base saying they were going to go in a full-blown rebuild and that they wanted fans to be patient, but they're finally having an open dialogue with the direction of the team. And then just a summer later, Stan Bowman punts on that idea. He goes and trades for Marc-Andre Fleury, goes and trades for Seth Jones, gives up 2 first-round picks in the process, a young defenseman in Adam Boquist, who looked really solid with the Blue Jackets. And sure, we got Seth Jones, and I like Seth Jones, but now it's not fitting what we're trying to do at all. And with the prospect pool being so limited, because the previous regime was dishing out every first round pick to try and keep the team relevant, here we are in this, in between a rock and a hard place where we're not good enough to compete on the ice. And prior to this year's NHL draft, we had one of the thinnest prospect pools in the entire NHL. So it was kind of like, what direction do we go in here? So yeah, it's definitely annoying that, again, in a season that's probably going to be the last of Jonathan Taves and Patrick Kane's here in Chicago, if I had to guess, that we're blowing it on a complete rebuild, and the front office isn't really even focused on winning this year. Yeah, that sucks. But I also think they didn't really have a choice, man. And if they wanted to save this team in 4, 5, or 6 years rather than, another 15, 20-year drought, I think it was smart to kind of look in the mirror and realize, again, we're not good enough now and we don't have enough help on the way. And the only way to kind of ensure that the days are going to be brighter down the road is to get as many future assets as you can, build up better through the draft. They also have to develop a lot better. They haven't really had a player come through their AHL system and be a big impact player in forever, really, since they won the Stanley Cup. So yeah, this is just kind of the reality of where the Blackhawks are at. And because the way things were handled under the previous regime and for the past couple of years, Kyle Davidson was just kind of handed a mess. And I think he was going to, make some fans pissed off with regardless of how he went about it. So I personally think it's just nice to kind of know that we do have a direction, because for a while there, the Blackhawks were kind of in limbo and no one really knew what they were trying to do. And now it's very clear and evident what this rebuild is going to be like. It's going to be patient. It's probably going to be longer than it is shorter. We're talking 3, 4, 5, maybe even 6, 7 years. But they just want to make sure they do it right. And look, at the end of the day, yeah, people are always going to be pissed that the end of Jonathan Taves and Patrick Kane's careers were honestly wasted. But if the Blackhawks can open up that competitive window again in 5, 6 years, and they're true contenders for, a handful of seasons moving forward, then Kyle Davidson accomplished his job. And that's, really all we can ask for. But I'm not going to lie, dude. It's frustrating knowing that, yeah, the last Stanley Cup that I'm going to see Patrick Kane host in a Blackhawks sweater, it was in 2015.
Yeah, that's it's good. And I feel honestly, you've almost convinced me a little bit more to be less angry with the front office, and that kind of leads into my next question. Part of the reason why it kind of makes me angry is because as much as I hate the Blackhawks, I want them to be good because what's more fun than the Blues and Blackhawks rivalry? It's what got me into Blues hockey. That playoff series during Tarasenko's rookie year, where I think the Blackhawks won in 6, but Tarasenko scored 7 goals in those 6 games, and oh, it's just so fun. So my question to you is, what is your favorite moment from the Blues Blackhawks rivalry of the last decade? And that's a really hard question, and I'm sending it to you first because I don't even know if I know my answer.
That's a damn good question. The first two I have 3 that come to mind. Number 1 is going to be that series you referenced, Jonathan Toews game 5 overtime winner to put the Blackhawks back ahead 3-2, going back to Chicago where they close it out in game 6. That was like a vintage moment that I'll remember forever. The terrible Blackhawks fan in me. The second thing that came to my head, I'm so sorry for this, was Brent Seabrook hitting David Backes. Sorry, it was a dirty hit, 100% dirty hit, but it sent a message.
And then wakey afterwards.
Oh, Duncan Keith hitting him with the wakey, like,
gross.
Oh my gosh, I know.
Gross.
Blues fans flame me for that one, but that's a moment that I'll never forget forever. And hey, because Brent Seabrook took that penalty, that's when Tarasenko scored that goal with like 2 seconds left and the Blues won in overtime. So you had that moment, but we went on to win the series. The other one, I've been to Enterprise. Is it Enterprise? Yeah, it used to be Scottrade. Now it's Enterprise, right?
Yep.
Yeah. 3-4 years ago, Jonathan Toews had a hat trick, overtime winner, and I was like surrounded by Blues fans, and I threw my hat onto the ice. I was sitting in the 100 level, so that was the first hat trick I ever got to see live. Overtime winner as well. Yeah, lots of good memories in this series, and I completely agree. Like, I have no hatred for the St. Louis Blues. I hate losing to them. I'm probably not going to root for y'all to win the Stanley Cup, but I don't hate the St. Louis Blues for sure. And I enjoy this rivalry a lot when both teams are good, because I mean, the Blues have just been slacking the Blackhawks for 3 or 4 years now, and I got to tuck my tail between my leg. It's been pretty brutal, if I'm being honest.
All right. So I figured it out. I remember. It's pretty obvious looking back at it. So 2016, game 7, Troy Brouwer, baby. He swings and misses at the first one. That moment was in slow-mo when it happened in real time. Rebounds just sitting there. I could have scored it. He swings and misses on the first one, and then he puts the second one in. But that's not even my favorite moment. My favorite moment is when Brent Seabrook fired it from the point, off one post, off the other, and out. And it's just like, I could feel the anguish of Blackhawks fans. Like you said, the evil Blackhawks fan, it wasn't the go-ahead goal that made Blues fans happy. It was the double post that made Blackhawks fans sad. It was just like they finally slayed the demon, and they didn't go on to win the cup that year, but that was my Stanley Cup at the time. Game 7 over the Blackhawks in epic fashion. You know, it was a tie game until the final moments. Oh my God, it was so fun. That's up there with some of the games from the Stanley Cup run that the Blues went on, just because like it was so vilifying. It was like, finally these stupid Blackhawks lost, and they did it in hilarious fashion. They hit 2 posts. Oh, it's great. Every once in a while I'll meme that double post thing, because it's just so great.
You mean the OG double doink?
Yeah, the double doink.
What's that? Oh man, that was a real heartbreaker. I was actually at game 6 of that series at the UC when the Hawks forced 7. The last playoff victory the Chicago Blackhawks have, by the way, lucky enough to be in attendance. It's been 6 years since they won a postseason game. They got swept in 2017 by Nashville, and the only other time they made the playoffs was the COVID bubble when they beat Edmonton.
Huh.
I guess they did technically defeat Vegas in 1 game before getting eliminated, but they shouldn't have even been in the postseason anyway. They were the 23 seed or whatever it was, because 24 teams made the playoffs. But yes, last true playoff victory for the Blackhawks was game 6, 2016 against the Blues. It has been a rough ride ever since then, bro. Let me tell you.
No kidding. I didn't even realize that.
All right. You ready to get into our third and final segment for the crossover today? For sure. So, for those listening, what me and Josh are going to be doing right now is I'm going to be asking Josh. Well, I guess I could just ask you, buddy. I don't have to tell the folks. They can just tune in. But
that's true.
I wanted to ask you, what in your mind, honestly and realistically, would make this a successful season for the St. Louis Blues? Is it Stanley Cup or bust? Is it winning a playoff series, reaching the Western Conference Final? Could also just be certain players taking that next step. As you mentioned, Robert Thomas and Jordan Kyrou are kind of the new group of the Blues. What do you think would be a successful season for St. Louis in your mind? And what couple of things do the Blues need to do in order for that to be accomplished?
Yeah, I think there's a short-term and a long-term answer there. I think short-term, it's just putting up a good playoff run. You know, it's tough when you're in the same division as the Colorado Avalanche. Like, you could be the second best team in the NHL. You can have a 110-point season like the Blues did last year. And if you run into the Colorado Avalanche, it's just like, you know, you happen to catch what is going to, in my mind, be the next dynasty of the NHL. I predict them to go back to back this upcoming year. They're just so darn good. So, like, I can't say Stanley Cup or bust. Do I think the Blues could win a Stanley Cup? Absolutely. You know, if they get lucky, because every team's got to get lucky to win the Stanley Cup. Maybe Colorado goes out early. Maybe Jordan Binnington stays healthy and steals the series against Colorado, or heck, maybe the Blues just get that much better and beat Colorado. But realistically, you know, it's tough with a team like that in your division. I think a deep playoff run is something that the Blues should be proud of. But in terms of long-term, it's Jordan Kyrou and Robert Thomas showing that they can be the face of this team moving forward. They got big contracts. Both of them are going to be signed until the 2030s, which I can't even conceive of looking at a calendar and seeing 2030. But if they come out next year and are the best two players on the team, which they're getting paid like they should be the best two players on the team, I'm going to be so excited for this team moving forward. You know, it's not that I don't love this current core, but having a new core and also not having to really rebuild too much for it is very exciting, and few teams get to experience that. And if even, you know, like the Blackhawks, they were the best team in the NHL for a while, and now they're probably going to be maybe the worst team in the NHL. So if the Blues can go out and prove that they have a young core that is capable of bridging the gap between the Ryan O'Reillys of the world and now the Jordan Kyrous and Robert Thomases, I'm going to be so stoked moving forward. I think that would be almost more of a success than a deep playoff run if Jordan Kyrou and Robert Thomas can come out and put up, you know, point per game again and just show that they're the guys. Because you know what? If they do that, the Blues are probably going to go on a deep playoff run. And the one other thing is Jordan Binnington proving he can stick around this team as a starter, because I think if those two things happen, if Thomas and Kyrou take over as the guys for this team and Jordan Binnington has a full season of being a starting caliber goalie, which isn't even that much to ask. You know, he could be elite or he could just be pretty good, and that'll be enough to make the Blues have a really, really successful season.
Yeah, I think it's really key. This was kind of a similar situation how I felt with Minnesota, because they're constricted financially due to the buyouts of Zach Parise and Ryan Suter going up, where it's going to be really beneficial for this team if that next wave can come in and take over. We know what Kyrou and Thomas are obviously already able to do in comparison to a Matt Boldy or a Marco Rossi in Minnesota. Right. But if they really solidify that, hey, we're the top guys here, we're getting paid, you know, fairly, this is the type of player that we are. I think that's just going to be so much easier for St. Louis to kind of accept the reality moving forward, potentially losing Ryan O'Reilly. I think it's going to lead to Blues fans in the organization. It's going to soften the blow a little bit and not feel as bad if you can really believe these two guys are it in the faces of the franchise in the future.
Yep, absolutely. You couldn't have explained it better. It could be a tumultuous offseason, but it could also be exciting in the sense that the keys are getting handed to a different group of players. You know, the Blues do have a pretty thin prospect pool as well, but they got a couple guys that I'm excited about. You know, Jake Neighbors, Zach Bolduc, Jimmy Snuggerud, who they just drafted this year. They got some exciting guys that I think would fit the timeline as well. So, like I said, it's a short and a long-term goal for this upcoming season. And if one of the two happens, I'm thrilled. But I think both of those goals might fulfill themselves this season. So I'm excited for that.
Yeah, it's going to be a whole lot more fun for your storylines this year than it is going to be for the Blackhawks. Because
yeah. What do you got?
In terms of what I
the number one pick, is that your goal?
Yes, that would be lovely. Connor Bedard being a Blackhawk next summer would be step number one. But I know, honestly, if the Blackhawks, if they win that lottery, I'm for probably if they get top 3, I'm going to Nashville for sure. I mean, give me an excuse to go to Nashville for a week.
I don't want to have to root against Connor Bedard.
Oh, Blues fans are going to be so salty if he becomes a Blackhawk. I'm looking forward to that day. But for the Blackhawks, it's kind of funny because they're in this really weird in between right now where a lot of their NHL roster, the majority of them, honestly, are probably not going to be part of this rebuild moving forward. There's a couple of young guys who are ready to, be NHLers and will be rounding out the lineup.
Sure.
But for the most part, the next core wave for Chicago is, either playing junior hockey or college hockey or down in the minors with the Rockford Ice Hogs. So
middle school. Yeah.
True. Yeah. Yeah. He's at his graduation right now. But I think the biggest thing for the Blackhawks in terms of what a successful season would be is that they have some guys, as I mentioned, who are ready to step onto the scene. A Lucas Reichel, who was a first round pick in 2020, Alex Vlasic, a big defenseman, Alec Regula. They have a couple guys who are ready to step onto the scene. And if they can become full-time NHLers and just be regulars in the lineup this season, I think that's a win for the Blackhawks, considering how they're looking about things in the future. If they can have more confidence in this first wave of guys that are coming through up to the NHL, I think that's going to be a good start for where they're trying to head. But I also think, a successful season this year would be how the Rockford Ice Hogs do, keeping an eye on these prospects. It's something, it's sad. It's sad. This is where we're at.
Down bad.
This is where we're at, bud. But for Rockford in particular, it's interesting because it's a really close group of guys. They were one of the youngest teams in the AHL last year and managed to qualify for the Calder Cup playoffs. And a lot of that group is familiar with each other, and they're going to be coming up together, and they're obviously establishing that chemistry already. So I think if those guys click again and, they can make the AHL playoffs, that's something to look forward to. But like I said, it's just kind of weird because for the Blackhawks, other than, solidifying a high pick in the 2023 NHL draft, what a lot of these guys do on their NHL roster won't really matter, as sad as that is to say. So, that's probably what I'd look at for a successful season. The other thing is how Luke Richardson is going to come in and make an impact. Under Jeremy Colleton, the previous head coach, it was honestly just a nightmare, especially the defensive system that they ran. It was a man-to-man structure that he had success with when he was coaching over in Sweden. It was never good for the Blackhawks, always on the wrong side of shots on goal, the analytics. There'd be I swear to God, 3 or 4 games a year where it seemed like they were in the positive. Luke Richardson is going to implement a zone structure. And if the Blackhawks defense as a whole can kind of, piece it together a little better than it's been the last couple of seasons, then I'll be confident that better days are to come for their defense as a group. So yeah, just a couple of little things. Wins and losses aren't going to be, what determines this as a successful season for the Blackhawks. But just hopefully it's going to be a year where we're able to accumulate more prospects. We can maybe move Jonathan Taves, Patrick Kane for some good first round picks or good young players. Multiple guys in that group. So acquiring assets, getting as many as possible, trying to build back better for the future, Josh. This is what life is like in step 1 of a rebuild, bro. Don't envy it.
Yeah, no. Well, hopefully in a couple years down the line, we'll see some headlines of Robert Thomas and hopefully not Connor Bedard, but someone good besides Connor Bedard. Because I like I said, I want the Blackhawks to be good. I love that rivalry. I would love for it to get reignited once the Blackhawks find their way back to relevance.
It's certainly my favorite rivalry that the Blackhawks have. I mean, and not even in a hatred way. It's just fun to go back and forth with the Blues, but they just haven't been at their caliber the past few seasons. So yeah, hopefully 2025, 2026, we'll have some good run-ins, Josh. But just wanted to thank you again, buddy, for coming on the show. I think that's going to wrap up this crossover episode of both Locked On Blackhawks and Locked On Blues. Just as a reminder, be sure to go and follow the show. It's 100% for free wherever you get your podcasts, and go and subscribe to both Locked On Blackhawks and Locked On Blues on YouTube. And after the show, also go and tune into the Locked On NHL podcast to get all caught up on everything that went down throughout the NHL offseason. That's free and available on all platforms as well. So be sure to go and check out Locked On Blackhawks or Locked On NHL, wherever you get your podcast. Once again, from Jack Bushman and Josh Hyman, thank you all for tuning into today's episode of Locked On Blues and Locked On Blackhawks.